Hey guys, I'm going to quickly go through some of the details of the Watergate scandal. And the good thing about covering the Watergate scandal right after the cases that you guys looked at is New York Times versus United States is a perfect bridge into talking about the Watergate scandal. Because both of these things, both of which happened during the early 1970s, really led the people to distrust the government. So, New York Times versus United States. If you've watched the other video, obviously you've seen this was when the Supreme Court ruled that the Pentagon Papers, these documents showing that the U.S. government, specifically multiple presidents, had lied about the extent of American involvement in Vietnam, that these papers could be published. The contents of these documents could be published in the newspapers. This was a very significant case because obviously the number of people against the Vietnam War went up after this, and people were pretty irate that the government had lied to them. Okay, and as we know from Watergate, just the even if you've never heard the details of Watergate, the specifics, you know that it's all about lies being involved, specifically with President Richard Nixon. Okay, now we're gonna skip that. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So the Watergate scandal, okay, with Nixon. Oh my goodness, let me get it together. There we go. The Watergate scandal, okay, occurs again under the presidency of Richard Nixon. Now, after the whole fiasco with the Pentagon Papers, okay, because the Pentagon Papers do come out during the presidency of Richard Nixon. Nixon creates this group of people known as the plumbers. Now, the plumbers are not coming in. The plumbers are not coming in to fix the White House toilets. They are coming in to stop these media leaks from coming out of the White House. Because after the Pentagon Papers scandal, they wanted to prevent anything that was negative or anything like that from getting out. And so that's that connection back to the Pentagon Papers. Now, these plumbers that he brought in, okay, these people that were designed to stop the leaks of information from coming out of the White House and to the press, unfortunately, some of the members of the initial plumbers branched into doing some pretty shady stuff as a part of a group known as CREEP, which is an unfortunate name for Nixon and all involved. And CREEP was an acronym that stood for the Committee to Re-elect the President. And here's what happened, okay, with Watergate. Okay, there was obviously the break-in of the Watergate complex, okay, a building in D.C. Now, what was so significant that was at the Watergate complex? Well, it was the headquarters of the Democrat Party. Now, Nixon is a Republican. Okay, when the burglars broke in, it was an election year. Okay, so they were trying to gather intel about the Democrats, right? About their strategy and stuff like that, as well as leaving like bugs, okay, to continue to gather intel and information from the Democrats about their campaign strategy and all of these things. Whenever it initially happens and the burglars are arrested, Nixon and the White House try to cover up all involvement with this. They say we had nothing to do with this. This was an isolated incident. We definitely, were not involved in the Watergate break-in. Well, the White House, again, they try to sweep this under the rug. They try to cover this up. They pay off the burglars, okay, give them hush money, basically not to say anything, not who they're affiliated with, none of that, okay? But the other thing is they start to utilize parts of the federal government to really kind of obstruct justice and get in the way of this investigation. They tell the FBI, you really can't look into this too much. It's a matter of national security. And then they get the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, involved as well. And they're kind of like, hey, you may want to keep an eye on the FBI. And so they're starting to get these parts of our government involved with each other and against each other, all to cover up Nixon's role in this. Now, really, again, this all happens during an election year. But look at this map. Nixon did not have to cheat. Okay, I mean, he absolutely dominated this election. George McGovern, okay, let me double check something. I'm sorry, George McGovern, okay, I don't know why I had to look that up. I was like 99% sure, but he's from South Dakota. He does not even win his home state of South Dakota. Nixon dominates this election. The only states that McGovern wins is Massachusetts and D.C. That's it. So Nixon is reelected president of the United States with 520 electoral votes. Okay, now. But even after he's elected, the pressure continues to mount against Nixon. People are still curious about Watergate, and new evidence keeps coming to light. And so Nixon has to make a statement. And this is what he said to the American people in a live press conference. So Nixon tells the American people straight up, the people have a right to know if their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I got. Basically, he's saying I won this election fair and square, and all these things. But then it gets pretty hairy for Nixon. So let me tell you something about Richard Nixon. He was one paranoid dude. Okay, he had absolutely every conversation taped in the White House. He wanted to know if the chef in the kitchen was talking smack about him. Okay? So there are bugs all over the White House. It was one of his own bugs in the Oval Office that actually ended up getting him. A former White House counsel comes forward and says that him and Nixon discussed the cover-up of the Watergate scandal, of like paying the burglars the hush money, all of these things that they discussed this cover up on in the Oval Office, and that there should be tape proof of this. Nixon comes out and is like, "Hey, I'm the president. I have executive privilege. Like, there are certain things that the American people do not need to know, and this is confidential information. I do not have to release this." The Supreme Court, in a landmark case known as United States versus Nixon, ruled that Nixon had to turn over these tapes. And again, on these tapes, Nixon is admitting his involvement with the Watergate scandal, the cover-up aspect of this. Okay? And so it's not looking good for Nixon. They have tape proof of him admitting what he did. So you're like, if you're Nixon, what are you going to do? Well, the ultimate result of Watergate is that Nixon decides to resign. He steps aside. On August 9th, 1974, he is the only president in the history of the United States to ever do this. And you're like, okay, why did he resign? Well, it was pretty evident that articles of impeachment were being in the process of being brought forth against him, and that it's highly likely he would have been convicted in the Senate and officially removed from office. So before he could be impeached and removed, he would have been the only president in the history of our country to have that happen to him. He decided he was going to step away. I'm going to play this video for you guys now, because my dad, he was 9 years old when this happened, but he still remembers the day that Richard Nixon resigned the office of President of the United States. Here's what he said.